We welcome you to join us this Mother's Day morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. In honor of Mother's Day, let's share a brief moment of silence and appreciation for our mothers and our caretakers. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are here, please keep your masks on and socially distance. We can speak in normal tones, but singing or chanting creates an increased risk of airborne exposure. So we ask you to please refrain for the time being. We invite those of you in the sanctuary to sit back and enjoy listening to our songs. For those of you at home, sing your hearts out. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. Our call to worship. Please join me in reading our mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. This morning, we have the pleasure of having Lisa Masengale, Curator of Historic Structures for the City of Riverside's Museum Department. Formerly, Lisa worked at California State Parks in Monterey, California, in the Living Computer Museum in Seattle, Washington. Lisa earned her BA in Archaeology and Master's in the Archaeology of Buildings at the University of York, UK. She also previously worked in curatorial departments of the National Mining Hall of Fame and Museum in Leadville, Colorado, in the Gaston County Museum of Art and History in Dallas, North Carolina. Lisa loves scouring thrift stores, flea markets, and estate sales for treasures, and is a proud Pom mom to her beloved Pomeranian mix, Rocky. May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which is a fitting time to learn about a local Japanese immigrant family's fight for social justice. It is also fitting to reflect on how far we have come, as well as how much further we have to go in light of the recent surge of hate crimes against Asians and Asian Americans, exacerbated by anti-Asian rhetoric and blame. As stated in a March 17th UUA press release entitled, "The UUA decries anti-Asian violence." This rise in violence is another result of systemic racism that is rooted deeply in the United States. We must confront ignorance with information and education. We must not tolerate the racist violence and the multiple systemic crises of injustice that the COVID pandemic has laid bare. In the midst of the forces of hate that seek to undermine our fundamental interdependence, we must reaffirm our compassion and responsibility to one another. Each of us needs to look out for one another, not only as the AAPI community or any other marginalized community, but as members of the human community. Harada House was built in 1884 on 3356 Lemon Street in Riverside, California. That's just down the road. The house was the focus of the California Alien at Land Law of 1913, which prevented foreigners who were ineligible for citizenship from owning property. The story of Harada House is one family's struggle for their civil and individual rights. Because of the family's triumph in this fight, the house was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1990, the federal government's highest recognition of historic significance. It is currently overseen by the Museum of Riverside. We have two lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. Let us acknowledge that we walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. Let us never forget that the sacred space which we occupy was first the sacred space of a mixture of several groups of California Indians, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to live out our dream of a world community of peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is As We Proclaim Worth by Dan Lambert. You are welcome here, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what your background. You are welcome here to join us as we proclaim worth in our spiritual journeys. You are welcome to join us as we listen to songs that uplift our very beings. You are welcome to join us in community as we learn, live, and love together. All are welcome as we worship that which gives us each meaning and value. No matter what you call this building, this hour, or this gathering of people, we worship as one body, illuminated by the chalice. Our opening hymn this morning is There Is Love Somewhere. For those in the sanctuary, please sit back and enjoy the hymn, but please do not sing along.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
We have a tradition here at UUCR. We like to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. But we know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others. and we won't ask you to do something we wouldn't do ourselves. So I'm going to choose some unsuspecting soul who has been here a while to tell us your name and how you first found out about our church. We ask you to hold the mic close to your face and speak into it directly and clearly so everyone can hear. So today I will choose Martha. Martha, would you be willing to speak to us? Please stand if you are willing and able, and tell us your name, where you are from, and how you found out about this place.
Good morning. I've been here long, and it's wonderful to be back with real people in person. And for those people who keep me in, I hope you can join us soon. And, looks like we have a pretty good attendance at this moment.
Okay. So for new guests, our visitors book is in the parish hall. So before you leave, please make sure that you sign that so that we can let you know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. Now we will have a few announcements by Alec Peck.
Thank you, Grace. Good morning. My name is Alec Peck. I'm part of your worship committee, and I'd like to share our announcements with you today. During the service, we're going to mention several websites, emails, and addresses, phone numbers, the like. And at the end of the service, there is going to be a slide with that information up, and it is also available on our website if you don't catch it when we say it live. Chat time is a time about an hour after. It'll start about a half hour after the service ends. It's time for us to chat amongst ourselves. We usually start by talking about the topics of the service and then moving on to other relevant topics. It'll be held on Zoom. We'll be starting probably today at closer to 11:45. And to participate in person, come and speak to myself or another member of the worship committee to arrange for a place for us to meet in person. Those locations will be determined depending on the availability with COVID restrictions in mind, of course. To participate, otherwise, you'll need a separate Zoom link, not the one that you're in now. It's available on the website, the uuchurchofriverside.org, and there's a link titled the Zoom chat time link. For Joys and Concerns is one of our longstanding UU rituals, gives us a chance to share our milestones, losses, achievements, and experiences, no matter how big or how small, that occur to us throughout the month with each other. And now that our doors are open again, we'll be sharing those on the first Sunday of each month. We'd like to hear from those of you in the sanctuary and read any contributions that we have. There's a book here by the dais at the front of the pulpit where you can write your joys and concerns as they occur to you throughout the month, or you can send them to the uuchurchofriverside@gmail.com. And the next Joys and Concerns will be shared on June 6th. The monthly newsletter also comes out at the beginning of each month. That's sent out by email, and if you would like to request by snail mail, then you can. But if there's anything that you'd like to see in there that you feel is newsworthy or that you'd like to contribute, you should email that to the uuchurchofriverside.calendar@gmail.com, or you can call the church office. The number is 951-686-6515. And if you'd like to be added to the mailing list for that, if you haven't received it, please contact the church office. The US has fully vaccinated more than 100 million people at this point against COVID-19, according to the CDC. In Riverside County, the COVID-19 positivity and case rates are both moving down, signaling towards a mitigation, at least in this area of the virus. The county is now in the so-called orange tier, slightly better than red tier, I presume, which means that there is a, quote, minimal presence of the virus. Vaccinations are now available for all Californians aged 16 and up, and you can make an appointment for that at vaccine.ca.gov or at covid19.ca.gov. More information and options does also have some more information about your available options and where you can get those vaccines. Remember that we're all in this together. We have to take responsibility to protect both ourselves and others. The mantra here is shelter in place, maintain your space, cover your face. Now I'd like to invite up Adam to tell you about the Social and Environmental Justice Committee.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Social and Environmental Justice Committee. We have our meetings on the first and third Sunday of the month. And so next week we will have our Social and Environmental Justice Committee meeting. I've got one announcement though for this week. Pico, California is actually ICUC here locally is joining with Pico, California in this week of action. Our elected leaders in California are overdue for bold action that rebuilds what's broken and imagines a government that cares for all of us. Right now, they are negotiating a new state budget. A state budget is a moral document, right? Jesus said you place your treasure where your heart is. And so the state is looking at where are we placing our treasure. This week, ICUC, like I said, is joining with Pico, California in urging our elected leaders to pass a moral budget by providing full rent debt relief, investing in community-based alternatives to policing, and funding legal assistance for tenants, among other priorities. To take part in this action, this week of action, there is an action every day from Tuesday through Friday to take part in. You can go to our website, uuchurchriverside.org, click justice and click social and environmental justice, or if you're on the social and environmental justice web email list, wait for an email on around noon tomorrow with an explanation of how to do it. Every day you go on the web page, click on the same link, it'll bring you to a page where you type in your information and there's a different target. So the 11th is Tenant Tuesday, where we will talk about full rent debt relief and extending protections from the evictions. On Wednesday, the 12th, is Transformative Justice Wednesday. We're going to call legislators about funding reentry housing and community alternatives to policing. That's AB 328 and AB 118. On the 13th is Senate Thursday. We're going to talk to our state senators about the Senate bills, decertifying abuse of police, SB 2, and sunsetting criminal convictions, SB 731. And then the 14th is Renter Friday, where we will talk to our legislators about funding legal assistance for renters. Right now, if you go to criminal court, you have the right to be represented by a lawyer, but somebody who's facing eviction doesn't have that right. AB 1487 will fund to be able to have public defenders who can defend people who are going through eviction court. So that's every day, Tuesday through Friday, there's a different action, a different target. So if you go on the webpage, click on the link that day, it will bring you to the action that you can take that day. Thank you very much. And our next.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for minding the slides. You do a great job. Our next hymn is Spirit of Life. Once again, if you're here with us in the sanctuary, we must ask you to at most quietly hum under your breath, no vocalizing. Otherwise, please sit back, close your eyes, and listen to our hymn, Spirit of Life. I'd now like to introduce Dinah Rowe, our church treasurer, who will speak to us about sharing our treasure. Thank you, Dinah.
Good morning, thank you. This portion of our service is for supporting our church and all the activities that go on here. I really liked Adam, I really liked what you said, support where your heart is. And that's what we need to do. Our heart is with this church, trying to make a go of it and continue supporting it. Oh, I guess do I need the microphone for this? No? Okay, we're all okay? All right. We have Stater's gift cards, which is one way we support our church. I have them with me every morning. Oh, okay. Also, occasionally I take orders for Great Lakes script cards, which is another fundraiser that we support. It brings in a little bit of money for our treasury. You can contact myself or Robert about getting Stater's cards. I have the Stater's cards with me on Sunday morning. And if you want to place a gift card order, you can tell Robert about that too. Okay, well, a couple of people volunteer for ushers to come forward. Linda? Can we have our song, Adam? Thank you.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Our meditation for today is Let Us Tell Stories of Mothers by Marjorie Killeran. Let us tell the stories of mothers, stories that could be true. Let us tell of warm mothers, soft and round, likely to be found with flour on their nose, and always ready to pour you a glass of milk to go with the cookies on your plate. These mothers are increasingly rare. Let us tell of mothers who are like bubbles of champagne. They surprise your senses, leave you giggly, but when you least expect it, they erupt with an unexpected pop. Stories that could be true. Then there are grouchy mothers, stressed mothers, exhausted mothers, faces lined with worry and spirits tired and gray. Other mothers are wise and reliable, not prone to many words or to a lot of noise, but you know that when you need them, they'll be there. Let us tell of fierce mothers, the ones who love you even when you're wrong. Let us tell also of absent mothers, whose memory shimmers at the edges of your heart. Let us tell of distant mothers, cruel mothers, loving mothers, giving mothers. There are walk-away mothers, save the world mothers, too busy mothers, mothers you cry because you lost them, and mothers who make you cry because you can't. Stories that could be true. May we hold in our hearts the mothers we have known, those who loved us and those who tried. May we forgive the mothers who didn't get it right and try to release the knots of disappointment, anger, grief, pain.
May we hold in our hearts the truth that mothering, nurturing, is a task that belongs to all. However old or young you are, whatever your gender, may you make extra room for nurturing in your life this week. May you say something real to a harried store clerk. Give a coworker a genuine compliment. Take time to listen deeply to a friend. In our shared silence, may we remember and reflect and create anew the stories of love and nurture from this point forward, stories that can be true. Now let us pause for a moment of silence.
Now I would like to introduce Lisa Masengale, speaking to us on the National Historic Landmark, Harada House.
Thank you so much for having me today. It is always a pleasure to be invited to speak about the Harada family and the Harada story, especially during AAPI month and on Mother's Day. We do have an upcoming webinar with the Harada House Foundation on stopping AAPI hate. So please keep an eye out on our social media and the Harada House Foundation social media for details on when that webinar will be coming out later this spring or in early summer. And just on a personal note, you might notice I get a little emotional when I talk about the Harada story. From the very first time that I learned about their story, I made a really deep emotional connection with them, and particularly with Ken Harada. You don't have to be a mother to really connect with the Haradas, and in my case, with the mother Ken, and imagining what she went through for her children. So the Harada House was built in about 1884 as a single-story Victorian cottage. In 1990, it was named a National Historic Landmark. It's within the Heritage Square Historic District for the city of Riverside. It's a City of Riverside landmark, and it's also being finalized as a California State Landmark as well. The Museum of Riverside has owned the property since 2003, when it was donated to us by the Harada family heirs. You might have seen us in the news late last year. We received a Save America's Treasures grant from the federal government for $500,000, and we are currently fundraising the $500,000 match for that grant. And we were also named to the National Trust's 11 Most Endangered list. And if you spotted Sumi Harada and Harada House, you might have seen them in the National Trust's campaign for Where Women Made History. So Sumi and the Harada House were actually some of their hero images in that national advertising campaign. So as mentioned, the Harada House is about 3.5 blocks from where you are right now. If you're joining me in person, it's just down the street on Lemon Street. It was always a central location, and that's one of the reasons why it was appealing to the Haradas. It was easy walking distance to their children's school, to their church, and to their restaurant. So Ken and Jukichi Harada have an unusual love story in Japan in the 19th century. Ken, she came from a family of samurai, and Jukichi, he came from a long line of many generations of school teachers. But they didn't have an arranged marriage. They met through Ken's older brother, who was a friend of Jukichi's, and they fell in love and got married. Now, according to his children, Jukichi was never really satisfied with the prospects of life as a school teacher in Japan. He wanted more. It was kind of a modest outlook for his life. So shortly after marrying Ken, in 1898, he set off for the United States. And soon after he arrived, he joined the galley crew of a ship supporting the Spanish-American War. So Jukichi was actually a US Navy veteran of the Spanish-American War. In late 1902, he traveled back to Japan, where he got to meet his son for the first time. So I guess my PowerPoint isn't showing up on there, but we have a portrait, if you're watching on Zoom, of the family taken in 1903.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
To interrupt you. I'm sorry. We have to share your screen.
Oh, she didn't, sorry.
Oh, no, that's entirely my fault. I'm so sorry, everybody. I showed it for you, but I didn't actually share the screen. I'm so sorry, everybody.
There we go.
This
Okay.
is what we're supposed to be seeing.
Yes. You didn't.
Sorry.
Is it? Not
I don't know. It was there for a second.
There we go.
I'm so sorry.
You didn't miss much. You just missed a map showing where the Harada House is and a current picture. So that portrait on the left is one of my favorite family photos of the Haradas, and it was taken right after Jukichi rejoined his family in Japan, and he got to meet his son Masuatsu for the first time. I love this picture because it really tells the family story at this point in their life. You have Jukichi just returning from the US. He's in Western clothing, whereas Ken and his son Masuatsu are still in traditional Japanese clothing. But Masuatsu is wearing a cap that maybe came from his father's naval service. And I love how if you look at Masuatsu, he's leaning towards his mother. He didn't know his father yet. He had just met him for the first time. So I kind of like reading something into that in this portrait. Very shortly after this photo was taken, Jukichi went back to the United States. And in fact, he never would return to Japan again. And that wasn't the plan. He didn't know he was never going to return, but finances just never allowed him to travel back to ever visit family again. Now, the plan was that Ken and their son Masuatsu would very soon join Jukichi in California, but they were delayed because it turned out that Ken was pregnant again. So she had a daughter who died almost immediately after birth, and so they were a little bit delayed in traveling. But in 1904, Ken and Masuatsu arrived in California at the Angel Island Immigration Station. Now, Masuatsu, he had no trouble entering the US and reuniting with his father, but Ken was denied entry and was deported back to Japan because while she was on the ship, she had developed an eye infection. And even though it wasn't dangerous, they would not let her into the United States. So in 1905, Ken decided to try joining her family again, but this time the family was advised that she should try entering via Canada because she'd be more likely to have success. So Ken, alone but carrying a dagger, traveled to Canada from Japan, and then Jukichi and Masuatsu went up and met her, and they all traveled down to California. They initially moved to Redlands, and then a few months later, they moved to Riverside, where they would live for most of the rest of their lives, at least for Ken and Jukichi. Now, the photo taken on the right in 1912 or thereabouts It includes Jukichi and Masuatsu and their daughter Mine in front of the Washington restaurant. So around 1910, Jukichi and Ken took over ownership of the Washington restaurant in downtown Riverside. It was already named after George Washington, but Jukichi really embraced the presidential theme. He decorated the inside of the restaurant with portraits of US presidents and really played up the whole Americana vibe and did serve sort of what we would consider traditional American diner type food. Lots of meat and potatoes and fried chicken on Sundays. About a year after this photo was taken in front of the Washington restaurant, California passed the Alien Land Law of 1913. And this law meant that if you were ineligible to become a US citizen, then you could not hold property in California. So that meant that Ken, Jukichi, and Masuatsu legally could not hold, they couldn't purchase or they couldn't hold property in California because they had all been born in Japan and there was no provision for them to become US citizens. And there wouldn't actually be an option for them to become US citizens until the 1950s, which was rather too late. So meanwhile, there was great joy in the family when little Tadao was born. So the family's first US-born son, Tadao, was born in 1907. He was the apple of his daddy's eye. In this photo, he's the little boy in the sailor suit. Again, maybe a little nod to Jukichi's naval service. It was a big deal to Jukichi to have a son who was a US citizen. So while he was close to all of his children, Tadao was definitely extra special to Jukichi. But in 1913, tragedy struck the family when little Tadao died in his father's arms in the middle of the night in the family's rooming house. He had contracted diphtheria, and Jukichi would tell his children later that he held his little boy in his arms and through the course of the night watched him stop breathing, and there was nothing he could do to save him. This was a turning point for the family. It's not only when they converted to Christianity, but it's when Jukichi and his family were determined that they needed to have a single family home, because that was the way that they envisioned they were going to keep their children happy, healthy, and safe. Up until this point, as a source of income, they had operated rooming houses. So they'd rent a property because they couldn't own it, and then they would rent out rooms to various sort of transient type workers, but that's also where they lived. And Jukichi blamed those conditions for Tadao's death. So he was absolutely bound and determined he was going to find a nice family home in a good neighborhood, and that was how he was going to protect the rest of his family. Now, while he was getting the financial means to do that, in 1914, the family lost another child. They lost another daughter, Yone, again, right after birth. But by 1915, they were ready to buy a home. And in December of 1915, Jukichi saw an ad in the local newspaper for a house on Lemon Street. It had been placed at the advertisement by a Mr. Noble, who was a local attorney and real estate agent, on behalf of his clients, the Gunnarsons. So the Gunnarsons are what we would consider house flippers today. They had just purchased this property for a cost of $1,150, added some paint and some wallpaper, and put it on the market for $1,600. So Jukichi, he liked this neighborhood, he liked the looks of this property, so he contacted Mr. Noble. But of course, there were some issues with purchasing the house. For one, the Gunnarsons did not want to sell to a Japanese-American family. But once they negotiated a purchase price of $1,500, they dropped their reservations and agreed to sell to the Haradas. But there was still the issue of how were they going to legally transfer title to the property. But Jukichi said, don't worry, I know that my wife and I can't legally hold property, but I have 3 children who were born in the United States and are US citizens. So he told Noble that he was going to buy the property in the names of Mine, who was 9, Sumi, who was turning 6 on Christmas Day, and Yoshizo, who was 3. So Noble wasn't entirely sure if that was kosher. So he wrote to the California Attorney General, who wrote back and assured Noble that yes, the children were US citizens and were therefore entitled to the full rights of US citizenship, and they could own property legally in California. There was nothing in the Alien Land Law of 1913 that prevented minors from owning property if they were US citizens. That doesn't mean that was the end of their problems, though. The neighbors were not pleased. Mrs. Robinson, who owned the house next door, she let the rest of the neighborhood know that a Japanese American family was moving in, and they formed a citizens committee to stop the Haradas. Legally, they realized very quickly there was nothing they could do, so they decided to just buy them out. So they ended up offering them $2,000, basically not to move in and to go buy a house in a different neighborhood. As you can see from the screen, Jukichi's response was very emphatic. When offered the $2,000, he said, "I won't sell. You can murder me, you can throw me into the sea, and I won't sell." So Jukichi had a plan for keeping his family happy, healthy, and safe, and no one was going to stop him. This house was the way he was going to do that. Meanwhile, believe it or not, this case made huge news headlines, not just locally, but in nationally held papers as well. So this newspaper is from the LA Examiner on January 5th, 1916. And from December of 1915 through December of 1916, there were countless newspaper headlines about the Haradas purchasing the home. This newspaper is really special because it's the only photo we know of that shows the Harada's home before the addition was put on it. So this is what the house looked like when they bought it. And it also shows the 3 children who technically owned the house. Now, despite all of this hoopla, all of this bad press, Jukichi was so confident in the constitutional rights of his children to own this house that he hired a contractor to add a second story to the home, basically doubling its size, and to also do foundation repairs. And I find the fact that Jukichi said that the foundation was bad in 1915 and that water flowed under the house. It's incredibly ironic because that's one of our biggest structural issues today. And I'll talk more about it later, but our big first phase of rehabilitation is actually replacing the foundation. So some things have not changed since 1915. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Ken is pregnant again. She's pregnant with their son, Clark, who was born later in 1916 while they were preparing the house to move in. Now, despite the legal assurance from the California Attorney General that there was nothing illegal about the purchase of the house, the neighborhood committee or the citizens committee had such political clout and so much money that by October of 1916, they had convinced the California Attorney General to allow them to press criminal charges against the Haradas. So in October of 1916, a criminal lawsuit was filed against Jukichi and his 3 children for illegally circumventing the Alien Land Law of 1913. This lawsuit made international news. And it was rumored in the US papers that if Japan didn't like the verdict, in other words, if they didn't rule in favor of the Haradas, that Japan would actually declare war on the United States. So this was a really high stakes trial, a ton of press for this little family in Riverside. Meanwhile, Ken was terrified for her children. She taught her children never to accept food from strangers, and especially never to take food from any of their neighbors. And if they couldn't politely decline and they had to come home and throw it away right away, she was genuinely terrified that one of her neighbors was going to poison and murder her children. That's where I get emotional. I can't imagine being a mother afraid your own neighbor will kill your children simply because you and your husband were born in Japan. So the case lasted from 1916 to 1918. Testimony at trial didn't happen until 1918, and Jukichi and 6 of the neighborhood committee members testified. And the testimony really focused on why Jukichi wanted to buy the house. And even the prosecution witnesses agreed that he was very clear that he was buying it for his children because he had lost a son in the rooming house. So in September of 1918, Judge Hugh Craig of Riverside Superior Court ruled in favor of the Haradas. And as you can see on the screen, he said the political rights of American citizens are the same, no matter what their parentage. He went and talked about how while the Harada children were of humble parentage, they were US citizens nonetheless. So this is the point where we can sort of breathe a sigh of relief. Justice was served. The family goes on to have 2 more sons, Harold and Roy. Out of all of the 10 children on the screen and their parents, only Roy is still alive today. And if you're doing the math, yes, Roy is 102 years old. So well done to Roy. The family went on to have great success. Masewatsu, the eldest child, who on the screen is in the back row middle, he became a surgeon and was known in the family as Doc. Nine on the far left, she went to community college. She worked in a San Francisco Chinatown gift shops and strung pearls. She actually made more money than her lawyer husband when they were newlyweds and went on to have a number of children. Yoshizo, who's in the front row far left, he became a dentist. Clark, who's standing on the far right, he became a speech pathologist. Harold, who's sitting on his daddy's lap in the front row, he became a dentist as well. And then Sumi, she went on to take over running the restaurant in the 30s, and I'll talk more about her legacy as well later. So at this point, when I'm talking to people in person, there's this great physical sigh of relief. You can tell people like, you know, it worked out for the Haradas. The system worked, their constitutional rights were upheld. And then there's usually a pause and people think about it and they say, oh no, what about World War II? You know, please tell me the family's okay in World War II. And of course, it is not okay for the Harada family in World War II, along with about 120,000 other Japanese Americans. Their home was searched by the FBI and items were confiscated. The restaurant was sold at a tremendous loss of only $150, which was not even close to the cost of just the equipment alone and its value. And they were forcibly removed and incarcerated in US concentration camps. The family was split up based on their original locations. So part of the family went to Tule Lake in California. Some family members went to Post in Arizona, and others went to Topaz in Utah. Now, meanwhile, the Haradas had a dear family friend named Jess, or Jesse Stebler. He had been a client in the restaurant for decades, was pretty much considered a family member. And when they knew forced removal was coming, he agreed to move into the house on Lemon Street and to protect it for the family. He also took over all of their financial affairs. So they had a number of income properties that were rentals. He took over collecting the rents and overseeing the maintenance of those properties. He obtained insurance for all of their properties because their insurance policies were canceled because no one would insure a Japanese American family in World War II. He took care of everything, the bills, money in, money out, and he wrote Sumi Harada in the concentration camp constantly. He would write her about all the financial affairs. He would write her about how the house was doing, how her flowers were. He tried to keep her spirits up. And he also sent a lot of supplies that they couldn't get in the concentration camp. And at one point, to cheer them up, he even drove his car out into the middle of the desert to the concentration camp with something like 6 or 7 dozen donuts and convinced the guards to let him into the concentration camp where he hand delivered the donuts to the Haradas and their friends. The letter that gets me every time when I read it was written by Jess Stebler to Sumi Harada right after her mother died. Because at the time of the forced removal, Both Ken and Jukichi Harada were in very poor health. The children tried to get a medical exemption for their parents, but were unsuccessful. So they pretty much went into a camp hospital and stayed there until their death. So Sumi, Harold, and Roy petitioned to be reunited and transferred to Topaz Camp where their parents were. And that was finally granted in 1943. Now, they went immediately to the camp hospital to see their mother, Ken. She recognized them, she cried, she hugged them, and by the next morning, she had died of a stroke. This letter was written by Jess right after this happened, and the opening line on this page is, "Where was your mother buried, and was there a headstone put up so that you can find the grave?" So to me, this is a reality check of what life was like in a US concentration camp in World War II. It makes me emotional because your friends have to ask you if there's a way to ever find your mom's burial place again. The fact that you just wouldn't be able to have means to do that really breaks my heart. The next year, Jukichi also died. Now, in spite of all of this forced removal and incarceration violation of their constitutional rights, many of the Harada sons served the US military. So Yoshizo had been an officer in the reserves prior to the war, and he petitioned to rejoin and was allowed to serve in the 442nd Division during World War II. Harold was drafted and served in the 442nd as well. Roy was also drafted, and Clark put up a good fight and said that they could not draft him while also violating his and his family's constitutional rights. So he waited and did not serve the US military until after everyone was released from the concentration camps. And basically, as soon as he was allowed to come back home to Riverside, he enlisted and then served in the Army after World War II. But he was going to wait until they let him come home before he would volunteer for service. Now, Sumi was finally released from the Topaz concentration camp in 1944, but she wasn't allowed to return to Riverside until late summer of 1945, at which point she was asked if she would convert her home to a rooming house for other Japanese Americans. They're pretty much people that had been friends of hers at Poston. There's a few physical remains in the house of this, including a note indicating where to put your dirty towels and which towels were clean, as well as the enclosure of the second-story porch. Sumi never married. She worked as a housekeeper at places including what would become the Heritage House Museum in Riverside. And she was truly a hoarder. I say that with love. It's a phenomenon commonly seen in incarcerees from World War II. You can imagine if everything was taken from you, you don't want to give up anything after the fact. So it's kind of what one journalist coined the privilege of clutter. In 2003, as I mentioned, the house was donated to the city. And we packed everything up. I say we, I wasn't here then, but the museum packed up everything and kept everything. And the house underwent emergency stabilization, which is still occurring today. So you can see that photo on the top left, that is just some of the emergency bracing holding up the house while we wait to fundraise and rehabilitate the home. And we also are stabilizing the historic plaster and finishes. And on the right, you can see a roof leak. If you go by the house later today, you'll see there's a tarp on the roof. That's preventing leaks until we can get the roof repaired. Ultimately, the goal is to create the feeling of home. So to reopen this and have you walk into the house with all of the furnishings as if the Harada still lived there and you're experiencing a visit to their home. So I'm actively sorting through our collections to see what we have. And because Sumi kept everything and the museum kept everything, it's a lot of discovery and excitement to see what's there. If you're not already following us, please check us out on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as at Museum of Riverside. So at Museum of Riverside, please follow us. Look on our social media for 2 short films to come out this year, including one on Ken Harada, as well as community exhibitions. And then also just great acknowledgement and thanks to our partners and stakeholders, the Harada House Foundation and our Harada House project team. It is a tremendous honor that we have the Harada family involved in this project. So the photo on the left, those are Harada family members. And the lady on the far right, that's Naomi Harada. She's like our family spokesperson. She's very actively involved with the museum and our interpretation and rehabilitation of the house. And it is an absolute privilege and rare honor to have a family actually involved with their own history and their own museum. So we are going to be starting phase 1, which is being funded by the $500,000 Save America's Treasures grant and the $500,000 match that we're fundraising. And we're going out for requests for proposals at any day now. And that will basically take care of the structural instability of the foundation. So people ask, what does $1 million get you? It is $6 million rehabilitation budget. It gets you a new foundation for your National Historic Landmark. Just a note as well, you'll see activity next door at Robinson House. We purchased the house in 2014 with the intention of making it the interpretive center. So the Harada House, you won't see technology there. You'll be in the house as the Haradas lived in it. But Robinson House is where you'll see sort of like modern type museum exhibitions being held. It's going to be reconstructed. Like the Harada House, it's suffering massive, massive structural instability. It's never a good idea when the structural engineer tells you, please don't stand where you're currently standing while you're talking to him. So it will look, when we're done with the reconstruction, like it did around 1930. So more like the Haradas would recognize it. Because today it's undergone many alterations, particularly in the 1990s. So if you have questions, you have comments, you have concerns, you have stories of your own that you would like to share, please always feel free to reach out to me. My email's on the screen, and it's lmasengale@riversideca.gov. Our museum director is Robin Peterson, and she's available at rpeterson@riversideca.gov. And of course, you can also always contact the Harada House Foundation at haradahousefoundation.org. If you're interested in supporting us and our rehabilitation efforts and that $6 million goal and our current fundraising match for our grant, there's 3 different ways to donate. You can donate directly to the museum. We have an earmarked fund within the city, and you can contact our museum director, Dr. Peterson, for more information on donating directly to the museum. You can donate to the Harada House Foundation via their website or contact them for more information. And then we also have the Riverside Museum Associates, the RMA, and on their website, you can also make a donation, and you can check the box that says you specifically would like it to go to the Harada House. So thank you again so much for having me today. It is always an absolute privilege to be able to share the Harada story, especially on Mother's Day and during AAPI month. So thank you.
Our closing hymn is We'll Build a Land. Those in the sanctuary, please sit back, close your eyes, and listen.
Our benediction for today is do not fear agitation. Do not fear agitation, for agitation is the rhythm of life itself, to be put into motion, to be stirred. Do not fear the movements that decenter what you always thought permanent. You carry within the center of your understanding the compass to show you the way. Carry with you the love that will hold you, the vision that will guide you, the relationships to all beings in the world that will ground you. Go in peace and in gentle agitation to stir this world to the side of love. Namaste, amen, and blessed be.
Thank you again, Lisa, for the wonderful presentation and for sharing your valuable time with us this morning. We really look forward to it, and we really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you again. And also, in just a moment, we're going to have a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session with Lisa right here. So this will be included on the recorded video that's going to be posted online, so keep that in mind. This is a transition, so we're just trying to figure out exactly how to do it, but we're now going to have a short Q&A for anyone who'd like to stick around for a few extra minutes.
Yes, questions? He lives near Las Vegas. Yes. Yeah, he has very dear family who are making sure he's very well taken care of. Yes. Yes, yes, they actually, one of his relatives posted on social media last week that he was attending a family birthday celebration, so. Yes. Yeah. So it's very depressing, the history of the alien land laws in California, and kind of shocking to people. So you have the first alien land law that affects the Haradas passed in 1913. Because they won a lawsuit in 1918, California passed a new alien land law in 1920 that closed the loophole, as it were. So the 1920 law said that you could not purchase in the names of your children, even if they were US citizens. I think it's interesting to note that the political slogan at that time was "Keep California White" in 1920. So that's kind of like a reality check of the sentiment at the time. As I mentioned earlier, the Haradas weren't eligible to become US citizens until 1952. The California alien land laws are not declared unconstitutional until the following year, but they're not stricken from the books in California until 1956. So about 3-something years. So yeah, so you have from 1913 until officially they're stricken from the books in 1956. So a long time coming. And of course, the 1952 citizenship law was way too late for Ken and Jukichi to enjoy becoming US citizens.
I'm curious about the funds for the Robinson House.
Yes.
It seems to me that, yes, we can put lots of money into restoring that Robinson House. But why don't we just tear down the Robinson House and put something that looked like it and use that as the interpretation center?
That is exactly what we are doing. So what I alluded to, but I didn't go into detail on when I say we're reconstructing Robinson House, and actually very subtly in the photo, there was a red sign in the Robinson House in that picture. Robinson House has been red tagged. It is very, very, very structurally unstable. So is Harada House, but because Harada House is a National Historic Landmark, everyone's in agreement pretty much, I think, that we should spend the $6 million to rehabilitate it, keep it standing, open it as a museum, keep that original building as intact as possible. We're taking a different approach with Robinson House. Originally, it was going to be a rehabilitation. We were going to keep the house as it is, even though it's been heavily modified. But when we realized just how unstable it was and how difficult and expensive it would be to get anyone so it would be safe to go in there as an interpretive center, it didn't make sense anymore, particularly because the 1990s alterations, especially, just there's not really much historic integrity left at Robinson. So we are reconstructing it. So what that means, sort of subtly, what I'm not saying is it's going to be at Robinson House demolished, and then it's going to be rebuilt using the family photos from the Haradas that show it in the 1930s. People ask, well, why don't you want to take it back to 1915? I do, but there's no evidence. And to do, according to Secretary of the Interior, who's like the golden rule for historic structures and how we care for them in the US, we have to have evidence. So that means we're going to take the house to the way it looked around 1930, because that's when we have lots of Harada family photos taken in their front yard, and Robinson House is in the background. So you'll get to see Robinson House looking much more like a Victorian cottage when we're done with it. From the outside, it'll look historic like it did in the photos, but in the inside, it'll all be modern amenities for a museum. Yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, the fellow kept watching for kept doing how uploading videos. Right before searching for this copy. Did he have a good life after that? Did his children?
So Jess, or Jesse Stebler, didn't actually live much longer after World War II. He died, I think it was in 1950. So he didn't get to enjoy a lot of time after that. But yeah, Jess is very interesting because by all accounts from the children, he was a family member. He took the kids on family vacations when they were little in his car. But he was, as they called it back in the day, a confirmed bachelor. He never married, he never had children. And so no direct heirs. But his brother had children and has relatives still in the area today. And they do occasionally contact us via social media. And I think it is, I would like to delve deeper into Jess and his story. But yes, the Stebler, he is of the famous local Stebler family. Yes.
Let's see, go ahead, Tinka.
Yes, I was wondering about,
Oh, hold on here. There you go.
I was wondering about the house next door, the Robinson House. And do you have any research or anything about it? Were they like kindly friends and neighbors of the family, or was that house one of the ones in which the mother was so frightened, and did not want them there? Is it called Robinson from a later purchase, or was it the original? So what do you know about that house?
Okay, perfect. So Robinson House is named after Cynthia Robinson because Cynthia Robinson is the neighbor who lived there in 1915. So the fascinating thing is Cynthia Robinson is the one who instigated all of the neighborhood drama. So she is the one that Mr. Noble, when the Haradas they knew their Haradas were going to purchase the home, he introduced them to Mrs. Robinson, who was going to be their future next door neighbor. Because the neighborhood demographic is interesting. It was mostly as the Harada children described it, a transient neighborhood, even though it was considered a very good white neighborhood. It was a lot of rental and income properties, and people came and went. But the people who were so actively involved in the Citizens Committee were those sort of like house owners that actually lived in the neighborhood and stayed long-term there, which Cynthia Robinson was one of them. So she is the one who said, no, no, no. I am not having a Japanese American family next door to me. Thank you very much. I will put up a spite fence. I will pave up, I will like plow up there are shared like driveway area. I will do whatever it takes. Like they are not moving in and I am not making them feel welcome. So she's the one who went around to all the neighbors, including really prominent families like the Vandegriffs, and said, hey, guess who's planning to move in? And started the whole fuss. What's ironic is that by the time the lawsuit is filed, and really by the time the trial happens, she became dear friends with the Haradas, and particularly Ken Harada. So according to the kids, it took about a month of them living next door before she warmed up to them. And it really helped that when Jukichi was putting up his fence, she came over and she said, hey, can you leave a gap in the fence because I cut through your yard to go to my best friend's house, who's another neighbor. And he said yes. And so he let her cut through their yard and he made a gap in the fence for her. So I think that helped with their relationship. Cynthia Robinson ended up having poor health, and Ken helped take care of her and would bring her food and was just a really good neighbor and friend to her. So by the time the trial happens in 1918, she's had a change of heart. And even though she is testifying for the prosecution, every time they ask her about the Haradas, she says nice things about them. So she said at trial that they were kindly people and that they were good neighbors. And she didn't actually say anything bad about them for the prosecution. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't go over.
Go for it.
Current building is famous for being nation. Interested in the audience and so on, making its collections through that. More casually than the travel collection. Did Frank Liver have been bringing to this situation, either first or behind the scenes?
Yes, the question of were the Millers involved, the answer is yes. Quietly that during the court trial. So what wouldn't have been common knowledge to anyone probably, unless they were very close to the Haradas at the time, was that when the lawsuit happens in 1916, Jukichi is advised to talk to the Millers, not just Frank Miller, but also his brother. And his brother is actually the one who handled everything in terms of talking with the Haradas and guiding them. But they had behind the scenes their support. They supported the Haradas, and they promised the Haradas that if they lost the lawsuit, the Miller family would buy the house and then let the Haradas stay there forever. Yes, so that was sort of something that Harold Harada said was huge for his father, because the kids said their father did not set out to have a landmark legal case. He didn't want to stir up a bunch of trouble, but when it came down to protecting his kids and his house, he was going to do what was necessary. But they said, Harold in particular said, if it hadn't been for the Millers behind the scenes quietly supporting their father and telling them that we got your back, whatever happens, you're not losing your house, we'll take care of it. Apparently that was very important to Jukichi. Any other questions? No, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And if you have questions you think of later, please feel free to contact me. I'll be happy. If I don't know the answer, I'll find the answer for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. That concludes our Q&A session. We'll now have a brief period for a bit of coffee hour to chat before chat time begins. Thank you.